So let's keep going with our project. What we've done so far is to have our index.js. We created our schema where we removed our book dependency. In the previous lesson we added a database file with our configuration object, and we've also, in this schema.js, we've also added a few fields. So we use the database, and instead of using this JSON object, we are actually retrieving items from the database. So we are ready to commit, and we say migration to Knex completed, and we push those changes to GitHub, and we get ready for today's lesson, which instead is going to be about user login. So what do we need to do to achieve user login? Well, first of all, we're gonna need a few extra packages for our application. So first of all, we're going to install bcrypt JS. Then we're gonna use express JWT, JSON web token, and then we're gonna use some types because we're using TypeScript. So we're gonna use types at bcrypt JS. We will need to use course, although we're not gonna use course in this lesson, or at least I don't think I'm gonna have enough time to also register the lesson about our React frontend. However, we need to use a course middleware, so I'm gonna install it now. Maybe not. Let's keep it for the lesson in which I'm gonna do the React frontend. So we need the types for express JWT. We use JSON web token, so types JSON web token, and that should be everything. Let's wait a second. Okay, so our files have been, our JSON file has been up to date. So we have bcrypt JSON web token. I should have actually done 2 separate installs, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we're gonna add some tables for our users. So what we need to do, we need to add a migration to create our user table. So as we saw in the previous lesson, npm run knex migrate make create users table. We're going to have a new user table from Knex, and in here we're going to return knex.schema.createTable users, and then the second parameter is our table, which is of type knex.tableBuilder. And exactly as we saw in the previous lesson, we're gonna have a table.uuid, which we're gonna name ID, which is gonna be our primary key, which is not nullable, and has to be also, we need it to be unique. Then we're gonna need a table.string username, not nullable and unique. Table.string email, which we can register, not nullable and unique, so that we ensure that only one user has that particular as an email or username. Cannot be, we can't register, it wouldn't make sense to register multiple users using the same email or the same username, of course. Then we need the table.string password, again dot nullable because it chooses us to have a password, and we're gonna have, like we did for the other tables, we're gonna have the timestamps both set to true. Okay, so we created our user table, so we can run the migration. So let's have a look at our SQLite Explorer. We have a users table, which is not yet in place, where we have an ID, username, email, password, created that and updated that. Okay, so now that we have this migration, we can go on our schema. We can go on our schema file. I'm gonna make it bigger. And what do we need to do? Now we need to define our user. So in here, we're gonna add below our author type, we're gonna add a new const user type, which is a new GraphQL object type, exactly like before, named user, and the fields that we need are ID, which is of type GraphQL string, username, type GraphQL string, and then password, which is of type GraphQL string. GraphQL string. So we have our user type, and then for each user, when it logins, we need to have an auth payload. So let's define const auth payload type, which is equal to a new GraphQL object type. The name is of payload. Fields what do we have? We have a token, which is gonna be of type JSON Web Token. There we wanna have a message, for example, when we say, oh, login was successful. Type GraphQL string. Then we want to have the user. We want to return the user itself, which is of type user type. So we have our of payload user type. Okay, so now coming back. Now what do we need to do? Now we need to define with a user, we need to define how the user is going to actually log in into the application. So what I want to make a mutation. Now there are several reasons why in the GraphQL world our login is a mutation. It's because it's something that has a set effect. For example, when you log in on somebody, you are going to update the logs, the status, the state of the application changes. I can talk about those things maybe at the end or in another video. However, now we need to add the definition of a mutation. In GraphQL, anytime that you change the database, for example, if you want to register a new user, you need to have a mutation. If in our example we want to add a book, we need a mutation. If we want to edit a book or an author, we need a mutation. So I thought this is the way to go. We're gonna introduce the concept of mutation. So const mutation is equal to a new GraphQL object type, exactly like before. However, this one has a special name. Name is mutation. Fields. In here we don't need to have, in the fields we don't need to have an object when we are talking about a mutation. So we need to have a register user function. Register user. And then the definition, it works essentially the same as we will do normally in a query. However, the what we're going to define in here, it's we're going to have a type, and the return type is going to be the of payload type. And then the arguments that we are going to provide are the arguments that we need to register a user. So we're going to have a username, which is of type GraphQL string. Gonna do this. Then we need an email and a password, all of type GraphQL string. So we have email, and then we're gonna have a password. So we have those arguments, and then we're gonna add the resolve function. In here we're gonna receive username, email, and password. Now you might be wondering, oh, am I adding this password in a plain text format? Well, of course not. I'm not gonna store the password in a plain text format, but I'm gonna use the package that I use, which is bcrypt, to hash the password with a salt, which means I'm gonna encrypt the password with a hash function, and using using this salt, that is gonna using a salt, it means that essentially even if I have the same password in the same database, using the salt and make sure that this password in the database will actually the same password will actually look different. So if I say ABC is my password, in the database this password will actually look as two totally different strings. Of course, if my database and my passwords are exposed, it's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be a problem because because an attacker, given enough CPU power and enough time, can actually go one by one and solve which one it's the most likely to be the password. However, it's gonna make his job much harder. And in the meantime, we should have enough time to tell our users, look, our database has been compromised, the passwords are being exposed, there is no proof that somebody already using them, but it's recommended that you are going to use this password. So let's go on and let's create our user. So first of all, let's generate an ID, which is equal to UUID v4, which is not imported yet. Oh, let's remove this import that I got by mistake. So import v4 as UUID v4 from UUID, and I forgot to install the types for UUID. So let's quickly open the terminal and npm install types UUID. So this one has been added. and the TypeScript is happy. So UUID v4. And now we need to create our user. So in Knex, we saw yesterday how to do an insert, a lookup in the database. To insert the data, we can gonna say database, and we specify the name of the table that we are interested in using, and then we're going to insert ID, username, the email, and for the password we're going to use bcrypt, which let's see if the automatic import is gonna work. No. So bcrypt.hash, and now we're gonna provide the string, which is our password, and the hash. For example, we're gonna sort with a string of 10 letters, which is gonna be done by bcrypt itself. Now this function I believe it's a promise. Okay, so we need to use an await function for it. Await. And now because it's an await, we need the outside expression to be an async function. So the resolve function is gonna be async, so that this await can actually work fine. Okay, so we can also await. It's not strictly necessary to await for the insertion of the user, because GraphQL is actually able to resolve promises when you return data. However, we need to wait for the result of the user insertion so that we can actually generate a token and then return this token correctly. Const JWT token. Let's make maybe a helper function. So inside this schema, well, I'm actually a little bit undecided if it should go outside. Maybe it should go outside under the main source directory. So let's do helpers slash generate token dot ts. Now inside this file we're gonna put a function that is gonna generate our JSON Web Token. So we're gonna import first of all the JSON Web Token package we installed. Import star as JSON from JSON Web Token, and then const generate token. We're going to receive we're going to provide it with the ID of the user and the email and what's going on here? Oh, okay, so we can do JSON Web Token dot sign, and what we're going to provide, we're going to provide an ID, the email, and now in here we need to provide a salt. Now we can do a random. Normally you want to install this one to be a very long JSON Web Token plus phrase. And this string can normally include symbols like this, like parentheses, numbers, etc. will be stored inside your inside your environment variable. So in production, maybe later in the course we're gonna do something like process.env.json token. However, for now we just use this hard-coded string, and then there is a last parameter where we can set how long expire in, and we can say 1 year for 1 year, and then essentially export default generate token. So let's go back to our schema where there is our user, and as you know, here we need to return of user payload, which has the token, the message, and then the user. So let's go back to here, const token is equal to generate token, and it's gonna take the ID and the email of our user, and then we can just return the token, user, the user object with ID, username, email, the message, user registered correctly. So now this message is gonna return our user. Okay, so now let's see if this one actually works. Let's open up the terminal, npm run start dev. Okay, so here I am not exporting the mutation object. Okay, so I have a register user, and I'm going to provide username, now email, and then password, the very secure password of password. And then we're going to retrieve our auth payload. So we want to have the user, username, am I not returning the, let's see, the user type. ID. Okay, so I need to return the email as well. Username, email, ID. Now it's complaining, but it's going to be fine. So if we run, token is null. So let's see what is happening. So in here you can see that this actually worked. So generate token. Oh, because we need to, of course, we need to return this token. So now if we run the same, it's going to insert, it's going to be an error because we already have it, but we're going to add a new username, new user. The email, there is no validation, so I can actually say just new user at email.com. And there you go. Now we have this JSON Web Token that we can use to ensure that our login actually works. So let's go back on our terminal and let's open our index.ts. So right now all of our requests go just through this middleware, that is the GraphQL middleware, but we want to use another middleware to ensure that our data can actually be accessed only if I'm authorized. So to ensure it, I'm gonna add we added a JWT package, an express JWT that I'm going to import. So import star as JWT from express JWT. And now I'm going to add a new app.use protected, and this section here is going to take as a second parameter the JWT parameter, in which the secret is going to be the same string that I used in this generate token. And then I'm gonna say the algorithms HS 256, and then we're gonna say what happens request response. So now if this middleware is going to modify my request object adding the user. So if I have request.user, I'm going to return response.send welcome. Well, actually I can do welcome JSON.stringify rest.user. And okay, so if I access the protected section, I'm going to have I need to use the token that is provided to me through the headers authentication. So I'm gonna use Postman for this reason. So let's take the token, let's copy it across, and let's open Postman. Okay, so in here I have Postman. So I set a request to localhost 4000 / protected. In the authorization tab, I'm going to put a bearer token, which is what I'm using right now with JWT, and I set this to the variable that I already have in my clipboard that I already set. So now if I send it, it's gonna tell me welcome, and this is the user that I just created and authenticated. This is the user of my request. And if what happens if I remove a letter from it? This one is not anymore valid, so JWT express JWT is gonna tell me that this is not valid. If I change a letter and this one is still valid, invalid signature, so the user is not able to access. However, my GraphQL methods, the other methods are still accessible. So if I do book, ID, and title, what's happening here? Let's see if I screwed up something. User type, auto. My root query, let's double check my root query, book type, Oh yes, of course, I'm not defining any ID, which I have no idea about which ID. I should probably make a method where I return all. Let's take an ID of the Facebook. Alright, so everything is working, and this is how you add authorization in GraphQL with using JSON Web Token. So all we have to do now is to essentially say change our endpoints so that when I do an endpoint for a login, it's going to be unprotected, but for a login or a user registration, of course, they have to be unprotected, while every other request is going to be protected. Let's gonna see next in the next lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you next time.